you sometimes find it difficult to keep motivated to practice piano? I know certainly sometimes I do, and in response to a viewer request, I'd like to share with you some tips about how I've gone about keeping my piano mojo. Are you sitting comfortably? Then let's begin. Hi, this is Tommy with Tommy's Piano Corner, the place for returning pianists, or indeed anybody who loves piano, to share tips and ideas of how to get the best from this great hobby. If it is your first trip here, then please do think about subscribing. Simply hit the little button in the right hand corner of your screen now and it's all done for you. As much as we all do love playing piano, let's face it, practicing can sometimes be really hard work, can't it? I mean, we need to stay mindful all the time. We need to constantly be working through things that we find difficult to do. And then added to that, we're bombarded with advice about various things that we absolutely must do every day if we're to become good pianists. And many of them are tremendously boring activities. I find that once we put all these things together, it can get extremely hard to stay motivated, even though we're fairly sure that the end result is going to be well worth the trouble. Now, I do have a playlist of different tips in how you can practice certain types of music and certain types of technical problems. And of course, having good ideas of how to practice is always good for keeping you motivated. But beyond that, I'd like to share with you today 3 different things that I do that I feel keep me really motivated to practice every day that I can. Now, my first tip is probably quite obvious really, and that is don't actually spend time learning pieces of music that you don't really like. Now, it might sound obvious, but I'm fairly sure many of us at many points in our lives have been sort of obliged, either by our own thinking or by our teachers, to learn music that we don't like just on the view that, well, it's good for you. Now, I listened to an interview with Vladimir Horowitz some time ago, and he was recounting that his mother used to complain to his piano teacher that he wasn't learning the right things, such as Bach or Beethoven or whatever. And his teacher's response was simply, leave him be, let him play what he likes, and this other music will come in its own time. In fact, Horowitz went on to say that he personally didn't believe there was any kind of conveyor belt of repertoire that you had to learn in order to develop the skills to become a good pianist. There was no one size fits all. For myself, okay, as an example, I've never really warmed to Mozart's piano music. Now, don't get me wrong, I find his orchestral stuff is amazing, but the piano music, not so much. Even, his sonatas and things like the ubiquitous Turkish March really don't sort of do it for me. And I did a while ago try to make myself learn this kind of music because I thought, well, it must be good for me because that's what people seem to spend a lot of time practicing from what I'd seen on Facebook groups. But to be honest, I found that very quickly into my practice sessions, my motivation just started to ebb away when I was working through something that, I didn't feel a connection with. Now, don't get me wrong, right? I'm not saying that we should only ever work on our dream pieces. I mean, there are loads of pieces of music that I can listen to over and over again for hours, but I know there's no way that I'm ready to start learning them, so I won't. But, there's so much music out there that is just amazingly beautiful within every ability range that we can always find things that we like. And I found that Pianist magazine, for example, in their scores section each month, or even Facebook groups where people will post, videos of things that they're learning, are fantastic sources of music that maybe we didn't know before, but actually sounds really beautiful and really motivates us to want to learn it. And surprisingly enough, through these kind of routes, you also then end up discovering pieces of music by composers you thought perhaps you didn't like so much that are absolutely fantastic. And, Bach is a great example, Clementi another. I've heard some of their work that I've fallen in love with pretty much immediately. In short, I'd say if somebody tells you to learn a piece of music that really you don't like because, it will teach you this or that technique, well, frankly, I'd be surprised if you couldn't find a different piece of music that you did like and that taught you exactly the same techniques. Now, my next tip is to practice in a way that keeps you motivated. Now, by this, let me take Hanon as an example. I'm not going to go into the discussion again as to whether Hanon's good or bad, right? I mean, does it really matter at the end of the day? But I've come across pianists for whom it's a magnificent badge of honor for them to say, I can do Hanon exercise number 1 at XYZ beats per minute. And clearly you can see by listening to them or by reading what they've written that they take great pride in this. They've got tremendous satisfaction from being able to get to this result. And let's face it, most of what piano for we amateurs is about having enjoyment and satisfaction. So if it's something that does give you satisfaction, then why wouldn't you add this as part of your practice routine? But if it's something that doesn't give you any interest and satisfaction, then again, why force yourself to do it? Now, personally, I don't really like any of these repetitive 5-finger exercise type things, right? I'm sorry, I just don't. But harmony is something that has always really interested me. I mean, I love listening to the way jazz pianists can reharmonize things in such an amazing manner. And so if you take something like Bach's C major prelude, which I've talked about before, it's a simple 5-finger pattern, right? That's all it is. Now, to me, when playing something like this, even though the note pattern itself is, somewhat repetitive, what adds the beauty is the harmony that it follows. I mean, the harmonies that Bach uses in that prelude, to me, are breathtaking. So if I need to practice something where I want a 5-finger pattern, or I want to practice blocking chords, for example, I'd much rather use this piece of music as a basis for an exercise to practice rather than some, academic arbitrary pattern of notes. Similarly, I'm sure you'll have seen lots of videos or articles describing the perfect piano practice session, right? I don't know, 10 minutes of sight reading, 10 minutes of scales, 5 minutes of technical exercises. And fine, why not? Absolutely. If that is something that motivates you, that level of structure and those kind of things, then definitely do that. But if you find yourself looking for excuses not to sit down at the piano because really you don't want to be doing any scales and you certainly don't want to be doing any exercises, then you have to ask yourself, is this the best way for me to motivate myself to stay focused and practice? Now, clearly, there are sort of certain building blocks that definitely help us maintain our technique, right? But if you don't like a specific thing, then find another way to do it. So, for example, I don't like scales. I never have. I was forced to practice them right through my grades, but I don't like them. Yet I do appreciate their use. So I will look for pieces that have got scale passages in them and make sure at any one point in time I'm learning at least one thing that's got some kind of scale passage so I keep this kind of technique fresh. And now for my last tip, which actually isn't really even musical. It's more psychological, I think. And simply what I found is, if we start to keep a record of our practice, it's amazing how motivational it can be to look back on that record. And, regular viewers probably know that I created an app that I run on my iPad some years ago, and I use it to plan my practice and keep a record of how long I've spent working on different things. And what I then did with this app was I added some graphs, right? I know it sounds silly, but I've got some graphs that show me how much practice I've done on a daily basis over either the previous months or the previous weeks. And when I'm sitting at the piano, I know that in the back of my mind that extra 10 minutes, if I keep going, will make my graph look better. Or if there's a day I really don't want to practice, knowing that that'll give me a hole in this particular graph, strangely motivates me to play. And it might sound daft, but I think it's true. And you could do the same thing in any manner of ways, really. You could take a simple diary and you could write in the number of minutes that you've practiced on any given day. You could just take a calendar and circle in green all the days that you've managed to practice piano and stick that on the fridge or on the wall somewhere. And perhaps if you're a little more IT savvy, take a spreadsheet, just set it up so it's got a few little graphs in it, and then you've got this visual representation, keep a record of what you've done and have a look back. And I've honestly found that having this to look back on, and also having that idea in my head that if I do a bit more practice today, the graph looks better, or I've had a 30-day unbroken run. If I don't practice today, that'll spoil my graph right in the middle of the month. It does sort of give me that last little push that sometimes I might need on a particularly bad day. So I hope then that you'll find these 3 little tips to be useful to you. And I know there's nothing rocket science or revolutionary about them, but sometimes it's the simplest things that can have the biggest impact. If you're not already, then please do subscribe to Tommy's Piano Corner. Don't forget to hit the little bell icon so you're notified of new videos as and when they're released. I thank you very much for watching and look forward to seeing you very soon.